Yeah, and if I just jump in there, Gilly, I wonder if there's any times that you've had where you were doing something and you felt like it wasn't you, and you like we've been speaking about that or authenticity and things like that. Was there any moments for yourself where you perhaps got involved with something and you realized it wasn't for you, and then you sort of got rid of it, or that maybe there was something that you realized it was for you, and you really pushed into it more? Is there any examples of that you can give for that?
A few, but maybe the one that might resonate a bit with your broader audience has to do with a job offer. Now, in the mid 90s, we were going through what was called the demutualization of banks and finance companies. A lot of our banks, life insurers, general insurers were mutuals, where they were owned by the account holders, policy holders. Suddenly, some bean counter gurus came along and said, you've got to free up the capital. So household names in Australia, like the AMP, for example, were suddenly no longer owned by the people who had policies, but they were converted into stock companies. And if you had an AMP policy, you got lots of cash, but you no longer owned by the shareholders. So to facilitate this very significant move, there was a lot of change at the top, and they decided that they needed to have what for Australia then was a little bit of an unusual character called a general counsel, and not just an in-house lawyer, but somebody who was right up there at the elbow of the CEO for absolutely everything.
Mhm.
At the time, I was in my firm leading a very big team of insurance lawyers. A headhunter came to me, and for probably 3 or 4 weeks, and I told the firm what was going on, and I was offered money, like I was offered $1 million transfer. Uh, that was not talking now like 28 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and stock options when it floated and all sorts of things. Because at the time, I was probably one of the best known insurance lawyers in the country. But doing a very careful due diligence, I came to a conclusion which was about me. It wasn't so much about the company, that it was going to behave potentially in ways that I may not be totally comfortable with. And of course, I'd kept my wife informed of all of these developments, and my kids were getting older. They were born in 71 and 73, so they knew the value of a shekel or two.
Mhm.
And they thought that the offer that was on the table for me was just irresistible. But for me, ultimately, it was unacceptable. And I didn't regret it for 1 second. They picked up somebody else into that role. My life went on, in a sense, financially very much poorer. I mean, very, very much. But I could have doubled my income in 1 step.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But it was just, there was something about it that I wasn't really comfortable. And I've said to people ever since, it's not just about getting a job offer. It's about getting a job offer which is truly you, that's authentically you. And you can be really at times desperate to get an income stream, but be careful what you're giving up for.
Yeah, I think that's interesting how like you would place that doing things that you are authentic and things that you're okay with a much higher value than the money, or like you said, the things that you're trading for that. It's yeah, I think that's really interesting how the importance that you place on that. That really the money can't buy that kind of authenticity and that feeling that you get when you're working on something that you're really passionate about. And particularly as young people, you can kind of do exactly that and just chase the dollars and try and find the highest paying job or whatever it might be. But I think it's important to keep in mind like the mission of the organization that you're working for, like you were saying, how they're actually going about achieving that? And does that align with my personal values and other people I'm working with, the kind of people that I sort of aspire to be like? And I think, yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah, the importance that you placed on that is being the most important thing by a long way.
Yeah, I do
It's
think
really
it's
interesting.
something a lot of graduates forget because it can be quite a brutal market to try and find your first job. But even with your first one, you everyone does their research of their companies, their firms, whatever, when they're doing their application. So if you can see from the start at that stage, it's not going to be a good. You don't have to feel like you have to apply for every single thing that's out there, even at the start. And then when you do have that first job and you're potentially looking to move somewhere else, it's an important thing to keep in mind.
And once you start compromising your core values and beliefs, you're on a slippery slope. There are marvelous examples all around the world at the moment, but probably no better one than some very fine lawyers who signed on to Donald Trump. And some of them have served time in prison, like Michael Cohen. You've only got to read their stories of what they've really lost to sign on to something that wasn't really of them. You start, once you start to surrender your reputation, despite all the theories of forgiveness and serving your time and everything else, it's so hard to get back.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's not just in the law, although it's very specifically in the law.
Yeah.
So back to a happy topic.